Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Michael Benson. Chris Eubank had this to say. He says, Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith, I don't think either actually wants to fight Canelo. Their previous performances were terrible. No doubt in my mind Canelo would stop them both. It'd be a more exciting fight with me rather than Saunders or Smith. That's not all, folks. Chris Eubank warns. He knows he can beat Golovkin. He'd take him out. A portion of the article reads, Golovkin is slated to face Canelo Alvarez in a trilogy on September 12th. He was due to make a mandatory defense in June, but that plan is now on hold due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. For the moment, it appears Golovkin will head straight to the third bout with Canelo. But Eubank is very eager to get Triple G in the ring. He is the number one name on my list right now, Eubank Jr. told Sky Sports. We were supposed to fight, and it has always irked me that the fight was stolen from me and given to Cal Brook at the last minute. In the back of my mind, it has always been there. I've always wanted to fight him. People put this guy's name so high, but I know I can beat him. I know that I have the tools and the style to take this guy out. My speed, my tenacity. I don't think he would be able to deal with it. This is the main fight. Canelo, everybody would love to fight him, but he's not going anywhere. He will be in the game a lot longer. Golovkin will have a couple more big fights, then bow out. I've been trying to get this fight for years. This is the fight that I want. Because of my style, I would stop him due to the pure amount of punches. Whether it's a cut or he gets tired, stopping him would definitely be on the cards.
Now, if we're going to address all of Chris Eubank Jr.'s recent comments, we're going to have to start with the Canelo stuff first. Chris Eubank Jr. is just the latest guy to throw his name in the hat for a Canelo Alvarez fight. Along with the name of Chris Eubank Jr., you have the name of Dimitri Bivol. You have the name of Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Demetrius Andrade.
Cholo.
Obviously, you have the name of Gennady Golovkin, who's more likely than any of them to get the fight. So in light of all these different names that are in the hat, what's supposed to distinguish Chris Eubank Jr. from any of them? What does he have to offer a Canelo Alvarez that would see him getting the fight ahead of someone else?
Nothing.
I say it all the time. A lot of these guys that have an affinity for name-dropping Canelo Alvarez as opposed to focusing on their own careers, they're wasting their own time. You've got to give that guy a reason. You've got to give that guy an incentive to even look in your direction in the first place. Because if you don't, then the decision to go ahead with the fight is solely up to him, as opposed to the fans. Creating a demand amongst the fans via your own performances, independent of Canelo Alvarez, so that a super fight actually gets made. It's not a super fight when you're relying on his marquee value and all of his paying customers, but you're not bringing any of your own.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, that's what's going on with these fighters that name drop Canelo Alvarez. That a lot of these matchups with a lot of these guys involving Canelo, they're not actually super fights. Most of them aren't actually super fights because these guys, unlike Canelo, these guys don't have sizable fan bases. And the reason they don't have sizable fan bases is because they want to play it safe up until a guy like Canelo picks them. The problem with that is, who knows if he's going to pick you? He's got about 6-7 other guys just like you.
Saying his name.
Calling him out. I mean, why do you think Canelo Alvarez was actually considering fighting abroad?
A woman?
And going to Japan?
Oh.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Do you think Ryota Murata's massive fan base, do you think that might have anything to do with it?
It might.
You know that Ryota Murata actually has a bigger fan base than the vast majority of these guys? He does.
In Japan.
In terms of a grassroots, domestic fan base, Ryota Murata has more fans in Japan than either Chris Eubank Jr., Billy Joe Saunders, or Callum Smith have in the United Kingdom. The same is true of either Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade here in the United States. Comparatively, Ryota Murata
Got a lot of fucking fans.
got a bigger fan base. Can sell more tickets where he's from than any of those fighters can, where they are from. And that's why his name was actually up for consideration for a Canelo Alvarez fight. And Canelo mentioned he's willing to travel. He's willing to fight abroad. And Japan just so happened to be one of the places he'd be looking to go. Now, why do you think he mentioned Japan? You think he's going over there for somebody else? No, of course not. If he was going to go over there, it would have been for a Murata fight. The role of an active fan base cannot be understated. Creating excitement, creating a buzz, giving fans the kind of fights that they want to see. It involves taking risks, but that's what you have to do, as opposed to what a lot of these guys do, which is playing it safe, hoping that Canelo will pick one of them, which results in fighters that don't necessarily have a buzz, as their fan bases just kind of plateau and stagnate. They're not really excited by what the fighter's doing, not really excited by what's going on, thus they add no value to his name. In the case of Chris Eubank Jr., he's had 3 fights since losing to George Groves in the final of the World Boxing Super Series.
3 in a row.
2 of the more notoriable victories he's gotten so far, victory over James DeGale,
There's that.
and the victory over Matvey Korobov. Solid scalps, all things considered, though neither of those fights really created all that much excitement. Neither of those fights really create that much of a buzz. And the Matvey Korobov, bit of a tragedy that worked out the way that it did, as it could have been a much better fight had Matvey not got injured. But better still, Eubank got himself another win in that fight. And I think before Chris starts worrying about either a Canelo or a Golovkin, he's got to do something else.
What?
He's got to get himself a title. You'll notice that Billy Joe Saunders was very close to landing that Canelo Alvarez fight, as Billy Joe Saunders was in a prime position. He's a 2-division champion, undefeated 2-division champion. Just so happened to be in the right place at the right time, as Canelo was descending from the light heavyweight division to the super middleweight division. And I'm not telling you that Billy Joe Saunders is creating excitement with his fights. Quite the opposite. Nobody's interested in seeing him fight a Shafat Isufi or a Caceres, but better still,
He had a belt.
he had at least one thing that Canelo Alvarez might want. One incentive for Canelo Alvarez to pick him, and it's that Billy is a world champion. Whereas a guy like Chris, he's not. So you don't have that to distinguish you from someone else, whereas Billy did, and Billy came very close to getting the fight.
Closer than Chris.
Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has affected, what fights we're going to see once boxing resumes. It's probable that Billy might not get the fight, but that's as a result of the pandemic more than anything else. Next time we see Canelo, it could very well be against Gennady Golovkin, and Billy might have to find something else to do with his time. But he did come close to getting the fight.
Didn't he?
A lot closer than Chris Eubank Jr. is right now. Chris Eubank Jr. has to do something with himself.
For now.
Incentivize himself as an opponent for Canelo Alvarez.
Needs a belt.
One thing he could do is fight Jermall Charlo. Take that guy's belt. Take that guy's own. That's one thing he could do to stand out from the crowd, as winning a belt from Jermall Charlo is going to be more of a blip on the radar than how Saunders became a champion. Saunders became a champion fighting for a vacant title against Shafat Isufi.
Who?
Isuzu?
Isuzu?
Rather arbitrary way to become a champion as a result of Zurdo Ramirez abdicating, vacating his title, and moving up to the light heavyweight division to do absolutely nothing so far. Better still, that's how Billy became a champion, whereas if Chris could win WBC title from Jermall, well, that's something, That'll certainly help to make Chris
An option.
more of a standout guy than some of these other guys. I'll tell you right now, he doesn't need to be worrying about no Canelo Alvarez. Not for the immediate near future. He doesn't. He's wasting his own time. He's wasting his own breath. And the same applies to a Gennady Golovkin fight. You'll notice that Chris Eubank Jr. seems to harbor some kind of regret, remorse, that the fight didn't happen when it could have. It's almost ancient history now that Chris Eubank Jr. was supposed to get that fight, but one thing led to another, and it was Kell Brook who ended up locking horns with Gennady Golovkin at what was the height of Gennady Golovkin's popularity in the middleweight division.
About 3 years ago.
It's interesting that Chris Eubank Jr. characterizes the situation as him being robbed of the opportunity to fight Gennady when it was Chris's father, Chris Eubank Sr., and their lawyer that costed Jr. that opportunity, that costed Jr. that fight. These guys had all kinds of demands for the matchup. Demands of Golovkin, demands of Sky Sports that would have been airing the fight over there in the United Kingdom where it was to take place. Those of you who kept up with that situation might recall that Eddie Hearn actually blamed Senior's lawyer, Chris's lawyer. He blamed them and their crazy demands for why the fight didn't take place. That these guys wanted the right to name how much the ticket prices would cost and which commentators would be allowed to commentate. And it's the weirdest fucking thing because at this time, Chris Eubank Jr. was even lesser known than he is here today. Yet these are the kind of demands that he had for the then middleweight monster, Gennady Golovkin. It's one of those situations where, what do you want? Do you want the opportunity to fight this guy and beat this guy, or are you just focused on getting paid? Because those two things
Ain't the same.
They're mutually exclusive. They're not the same thing.
Nope.
If you feel that you can fight this guy and beat this guy, then it's the opportunity itself you're going to relish. But when you let your demands get in the way of the opportunity, it becomes clear that you don't really want the fight. What you want is the payday. And the fight itself is taking a back seat to the payday, as you're willing to sacrifice one for the other, even though you're in no position to make those kinds of demands. Eddie Hearn stated that he felt that Junior wanted the fight, but he faulted Senior, his lawyer, for costing Chris that opportunity.
If anybody robbed Chris of the opportunity to lock horns with Gennady, it was his own father and his own lawyer. And you can make certain inferences based on that their hardball tactics are what costed Chris that opportunity, and perhaps they were hardballing the Golovkin people
On purpose.
and the Sky Sports people because they didn't really want that fight for Chris. So if Chris is going to walk in there with this guy, they're going to make sure that he's well off. That, to me, seems like a lack of confidence in young Chris, that, you know, they don't really want that fight for him, but if he's going to have it, he's going to get paid for having it. Substantially paid. Because they're not confident enough in his abilities to go in there with this guy and win the fight. Rightfully so, because that time, Chris's resume was paper thin. The most notariable guy on his resume was Billy Joe Saunders, and he lost to Billy Joe Saunders. Competitively, but still, a loss.
That's what he had, that's what it was. I'm of the opinion that Chris Eubank Sr. didn't want that fight for Junior, and he, used his lawyer to try to negotiate for certain things that he knew he wasn't going to get.
Exactly.
It's a very clever way of getting out of a fight. I reiterate, if anybody robbed Chris of that opportunity, it was his own father and his own lawyer. Nobody else.
Here today, he stands very little chance of being a priority to Gennady the way he was all those years ago, as here today, Gennady Golovkin could very well be going right into a Canelo Alvarez rubber match, a third installment, a third fight.
And he might get knocked the fuck out.
You know, the Canelo Alvarez people, their recent statements, they are fairly confident that in a third fight, Canelo is going to stop Gennady. And a good chunk of the boxing community agrees with this sentiment, as we also saw, how Golovkin looked in his last fight with Sergey. Now, one might assume that perhaps Golovkin might be a little bit fresher because he's had a little bit more time to heal between fights. As the COVID pandemic has slowed everything down, boxing has come to a screeching halt. But it's a double-edged sword, because while he might have been afforded more time to recuperate, he has also been deprived of the opportunity to tune up between fights. Lest we forget, he was supposed to fight Zeremata. Now he's not going to fight him. Or at least if he fights him, it'll be in his very next fight, though it's not looking that way. It's looking like he's going to go right into that Canelo fight. And if he does, he'll be going into that fight coming off of a very hard fight and not being afforded the chance to tune up between fights. So what does that mean? What does that mean for Chris?
Think about it.
Well, what do you think happens to Golovkin if Canelo goes in there and knocks him out? What do you think happens? It's possible that if Gennady Golovkin goes in there for a third time with Canelo Alvarez, he gets knocked out and subsequently retires, thereby depriving Chris of the opportunity to lock horns with him at all. It's for this reason that myself and several others stress that when these kind of opportunities show up at your doorstep, however many minor inconveniences come with these opportunities, you have to take them. You have to strike while the iron is hot, as nothing is guaranteed in life. You walk away from this now, you don't know with any certainty that this opportunity will show up later, and that does seem to be the case when it comes to Chris and Gennady. That you could have fought this guy a long fucking time ago. Your people, they fucked that up for you. Here today in 2020, you're not a priority to that guy. You're not on the list. You're not on the itinerary. Canelo Alvarez is on the itinerary. And if Canelo smokes this guy, what are the odds that Gennady Golovkin decides to stick around? What other big fights would be around for him to stick around for after that one?
Huh?
What? What? A fight with you?
Huh?
At that point, what have you got that he would want? You got a belt, you got a bunch of marquee value, bunch of fans, paying customers. What have you got?
Huh?
What have you got that would make you a priority to him?
Huh?
Because all these years later, you're sitting around thinking about what could have been, whereas what he's thinking about is what he's about to do. And that ain't you. A lot of guys these days, they get offered these kind of opportunities and they act like they're doing the other guy a fucking favor. Guys that never been on pay-per-view, don't have any big fights, any big marquee fighters on their resume, their track record. They get offered these kind of opportunities, and I swear to God, they act like they're doing the other guy a fucking favor. And this is what happens. Perhaps Chris Eubank Sr. spared Jr. a beating when they negotiated the Golovkin fight the way that they did. Perhaps he spared him a beating. But if Chris would have went in there, and he would have put up a good showing, even in defeat, that might have lended itself to his marquee value the same way that Daniel Jacobs' performance lended itself to his marquee value. Because he lost to Gennady Golovkin, he got dropped in that fight, took some hard shots, but he gave a good account of himself, and because of that, he was able to have other opportunities thereafter. Opportunities he still has here today. This guy's in the right position to land himself either a Smith fight, or a Saunders fight, or the winner of what could be a fight between them. Daniel Jacobs is in a prime position, whereas for Chris, the options really are limited, aren't they? Cause you're not going to get a Canelo fight.
No.
You're not going to get a Golovkin fight.
No.
I don't think that Chris wants anything to do with Demetrius Andrade. Call me crazy, as I've never seen Chris mention that guy. Most you got going for you right now is a potential Charlo fight. So if that's what you got, that's what you're working with, then you need to get the wake. He needs to focus on that and prepare himself for that, as that is his best bet to make any kind of waves, middleweight division, that anyone would notice. Don't tell me, years after your father fucked up the Golovkin fight, that now that's the number one name on your mind. That's the number one name on your itinerary. You are a day late and $1 short, my friend, and you need to focus on something else. Otherwise, you're just wasting your own time.